My name is Katie Breland and I will be presenting on my African Wild Dogs infographic. Part 1. Visual Potential. The visual potential of appearance refers to the potential to communicate how something looks using imagery. In my case, I decided to use a realistic image of an African wild dog to help communicate to the viewer what the African wild dog looks like. It was important to me to use a realistic image because the African wild dog is not a commonly known species, and many viewers may be unfamiliar with their appearance. The visual potential of location refers to the potential to communicate positions of things or places relative to each other using positions on the page. For my location display, I created a map of Africa, which contains colored sections representing the current and historic range of the African wild dog throughout Africa. The visual potential of numbers refers to the potential to communicate the numbers/amount/size of things in the world using the numbers, amount, or size of things on a page. For my display, I created a bar graph in which the height of the bars represent the success rate of different predator species. The main piece of information in this display is to point out how high of a hunt success rate African wild dogs have compared to other species. The visual potential of relationships refers to the potential to communicate connections between things or people in the real world using connections between shapes on a page. For this display, I used silhouettes of different animals to show the relationships between them and the African wild dog. The colors of the lines demonstrate the different forms of relationships, such as a prey or threat. The visual potential of time refers to the potential to communicate when events occur in time relative to each other using relative position on a page. For my time display, I created a timeline shaped as paw prints, in which each paw print represents a decade moving from left to right. Part 2. Encoding. Encoding refers to translating information or data attributes such as magnitude or category into visual attributes such as size, position, or color. For my numbers display, I chose to create a bar graph, which was my best option because I wanted to compare amounts across categories. In this case, success rates across different predator species. To encode this information, the size and height of each bar corresponds to the success rate percentage, while the color of the bars are all the same except for that of the African wild dog, in order for the wild dog to stand out. For my relationship display, I used a combination of different line treatments and colors to create 3 different categories of relationships within the network diagram. Threats are red and solid, primary prey is green and also solid, and other prey sources are green and dashed. I also used realistic shapes of animals and had each animal connected to the African wild dog at the center of the display to show that the relationship type is between the 2 species. The animals that belong to the same relationship category are also grouped together. For my time display, not only do the positions of the paw prints represent the time between each decade, but the downward slope of the paws also represents the decline of wild dogs over time, ending with today. The color of the paw print becomes slightly lighter as you move from left to right, which further communicates that the population of dogs are declining and leaving a lighter footprint. For my location display, the 2 different shades of orange are encoded to represent the 2 different categories of habitat range, current and historic, positioned throughout Africa. Part 3. Color. The colors used in my color model include different shades of orange, dark gray, light blue, white, and subtle green and red. These colors are bright and energetic without appearing too vibrant, which creates a mild and calm tone. In my model, the main colors, orange and blue, are associated with the scrubs the doctors wear, while the orange is associated with pill bottles. These shades of orange and blue are complementary to each other. In my model, I decided to use the light blue color as the background color for my entire infographic, along with the orange as a highlight color. I chose this model as my color model because the orange, dark gray, and white are associated with the color pattern of the African wild dog's fur, while the blue is associated with the sky and the open plains of Africa where the dogs call home. The orange is used throughout all of my displays as a highlight color to contrast against the blue background. In particular, my location display uses 2 shades of orange found in the vial from my color display to encode the 2 different habitat ranges. I also used the orange to represent percentages in my numbers display in the same way that orange was used to show percentages in my model. For my relationships display, I used red to represent a threatening relationship because most viewers naturally associate red with danger. Similarly, I used green to show prey relationships because green is associated with safety. I used the dark gray color to create a realistic silhouette throughout my display in the same fashion as the dark silhouettes found in my visual language model. I also used dark gray to create a title box with white text, just like the one found in my color model. The majority of the text in my display is dark gray, with a few occurrences of white and orange text, just like my model. In particular, the orange text is used to highlight the decades in my timeline. Part 4. Typography. For my model, I identified the use of two different fonts, Arial Narrow, which is simple and professional, and Callisto MT, which is formal, masculine, bold, and a little fancy. The Arial font is used throughout the model, while the Callisto font is used only for the title. I emulated this choice and used Arial for everything except for my African Wild Dogs title. While the Callisto font is in all caps, the Arial font is used in all caps only to identify labels of my location display to represent country names and labels in the key. I emulated this choice in my design, however I also used all caps for the title of my numbers display and for labeling my size comparison display as well. The precision labels in my model are bolded, which is another choice that I emulated. This is clear in my percentage bubble and in my territory size display. I also used the bold font technique to highlight aspects in my timeline display and in the explanatory paragraph. My model also uses italicized text to show species names, however I did not like the look of this choice and instead only used italics as part of the genus display because italicizing the species and genus is the correct scientific way of displaying them. Similarly, my display uses white italicized text with a shadowed background, which I also decided not to emulate because I felt the text was not very readable or clean. In terms of association strategies, I also emulated the use of a leader line in my numbers display in the same way in which my model used leader lines to label their timeline display. I also placed the text under or close to the things they refer to. The text in my model is also left justified and center justified, which I also emulated in various parts of my display. Part 5. Visual language. My visual language model uses a variety of line treatments. These include solid lines, dashed lines, and outline shapes. In my display, I emulated the use of dashed lines to separate my displays into different sections. I also used dashed lines for the annotation in my numbers display and in my timeline display. For my percentage bubble, I used white to outline the circle, and I used a solid line at the top of the display in the same way as my model. Solid lines are also found in my relationship display and in my size comparison display. My display also uses detailed realistic graphic elements, which I emulated throughout my model. Similarly, the display uses simple rounded colored graphics, which I emulated through the use of the paw prints in my display. These paw prints are meant to be the same level of detail and realism as the orange tiger shape from the model. I also included a realistic image to emulate the realistic tiger in my model. One area where I strayed from my model was the use of the outline shapes, which I chose to not include in my display. My display also used filled-in rectangular boxes, which my model does not use. However, many aspects of my model are rectangular, such as the separated sections in the right-hand side of the display themselves. Part 6. Visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy refers to variation in visual prominence of elements in a display. To create visual hierarchy in my design, I use size, contrast, white space, and alignment to guide the viewer's eye. The first thing the viewer's eye is drawn to is a realistic image of the African wild dog because it is large, detailed, and centered, and a dark color which contrasts against the light blue background. The reader's eye is then drawn to the title box, where they then read African Wild Dogs as the title. They then move on to the main section of the display, where they read the introductory paragraph introducing the state of the African wild dog population. The large percentage bubble is the next thing the viewer sees as important, which then leads them to the map. The map is high on the visual hierarchy because it uses a large amount of bright orange, which contrasts with the background, and because it is surrounded by a large amount of blank space. The right-hand side of the infographic has clearly defined sections that each contain a display. These displays are all relatively equal on the visual hierarchy and are not meant to be read in a particular order. The bottom section contains two elements, a hunter graphic with text and the timeline display. The hunter's gun is pointing at the timeline, which guides the viewer's eye and encourages the viewer to read this portion of the display from left to right, starting with the text next to the hunter. The timeline display contains dashed lines that also guide the viewer's eye, and the paw prints themselves act like arrows drawing the lines from left to right. The lowest elements on the visual hierarchy are the scientific classifications on the bottom or on the top right-hand corner of the display, and the sources and author name on the bottom of the display, which are the smallest. For the displays themselves, the numbers display has a clear title, which is the first thing the viewer reads. The African wild dog bar also is high on the visual hierarchy within the display because it is colored a different color than the other bars, which are the next lowest items in the display. Following that, the annotation is the lowest element in the visual hierarchy because it is the smallest. For the relationship display, the colored dog silhouette in the center of the display is the highest item in the visual hierarchy because it is centered and a different color than the other silhouettes. These other realistic silhouettes are the next thing on the hierarchy because they are large and contrast with the background. The lowest thing on the visual hierarchy is the key. Part 7. Unity and Variety. Unity refers to when visual attributes such as color, shape, size, and texture are repeated across the presentation. To create a sense of unity in my design, every display except for the realistic dog image uses either a realistic silhouette or the color orange as part of the display. This technique is also used by my model. Similarly, these realistic silhouettes are all roughly the same size. Variety refers to having variations in color, texture, size, and shape to make a visual look interesting and dynamic. In my display, I use a variety of realistic silhouettes that are all different shapes along with various combinations of text and background colors. I also had various rectangular displays that all have different heights and dimensions. In Part 8, Layout. My infographic is laid out in 9 sections. These sections include a title box, a large center section, a bottom display section, 5 smaller sections and a column on the right-hand side of the page, and a thin section on the very bottom for sources. These 9 sections match my model, although there are a few major differences. The first major difference is the change from having the realistic image be on the left of the location display instead of on the right, which is the case in my model. I decided to put the dog on the left side of the display because the natural shape of the dog fits with the natural curve of Africa. Another difference is that my display does not include an introductory paragraph as part of the title section because my African wild dog's title takes up too much of the space. Instead, my introductory paragraph fits on the left side of the main display. This creates a natural column that is not found in my model. I also added a percentage bubble to this column. The smaller displays are purposely laid out so that no two displays containing realistic silhouettes are touching each other. This meant purposely putting my habitat range display between my relationship and size comparison displays. Furthermore, I decided on this ordering of elements in the right-hand column because my numbers display and my size comparison display rely heavily on orange and are therefore placed as far away from one another as possible. To balance this heavy use of orange on the right, my orange percentage bubble is centered between them on the left to form a triangle of orange elements. Similarly, I balanced the dark gray elements by placing the relationship display roughly between the two dark silhouettes on the left side of the page. To balance my blue elements, I decided to add a title box similar to the one in my numbers display to the opposite corner of the infographic. To improve my design further, another blue title box could be added somewhere in the display to better balance the blue. The placement of elements in my bottom section is similarly purposeful. The hunter's gun is aiming at the paw prints, which appear to be retreating away from him. On the other side of the paw prints is the silhouette of a wild dog, which the hunter appears to be aiming at, but is risking shooting the person's silhouette. This is subtle, but meant to represent the way in which humans may be putting themselves in danger by driving African wild dogs to extinction. The paw prints of the timeline are also meant to be purposely found underneath the feet of the realistic African wild dog. Part 9. Alignment. Alignment refers to arranging text and graphic elements so that they line up. In my infographic, I align the elements so that there's a clear margin on either side in the same way that they are aligned on my model. The displays in the right-hand column are also all centered aligned, and I also made sure to align the colored box in my timeline with the colored box in my size comparison display. The title of the bottom section is also aligned with the dashed lines separating the size comparison display from the other displays, and the hunter's feet are aligned with the feet of the human silhouette in my size comparison display. In the end, this was my final infographic. Thank you for listening.